And then next question, what should I do during my pre-MBA summer to best prepare me for a pivot into private equity? Um, it's a great question. Like, first of all, explore the different routes in private equity, right? Private equity is pretty broad, right? You can go, private equity technically includes venture capital all the way through, large mega fund buyout. Um, and so really figuring out what you want to do and then gearing yourself up to actually go and get that level of some sort of experience, right? Because in during your MBA years, you're going to have the opportunity to go intern, right? Identifying and kind of working with your school and other people to go and get that internship is going to be the most important thing, right? And finding firms that also, like you're saying, pivot. So I suspect that you maybe didn't do private equity before, right? Most firms hire people post MBA that did private equity before. There are a number of firms that actually look for people who didn't do private equity. It's kind of like a way to get, diversity of candidates, right? We don't just want people who've only done private equity, right? So, for instance, Francisco Partners hires consistently people out of MBA who don't have private equity experience. You're not going to come in at the same level as someone who does have private equity experience, but it's a way to get in the door. And we've hired people who just did banking and no private equity before. People who've done maybe consulting and no private equity. We've even hired people with no finance experience whatsoever. They were actually getting a law degree, and we hired them, right? Varying levels of experience in finance, but finding those programs and finding which firms do that is also going to be really important. So you can focus your attention on which firms, right, to focus on. That would be my advice. Figure out what you want to do and come up with a game plan. Um, okay, kind of similar answer for you, Alex, right? Like you're trying to break into private equity from outside of private equity. My biggest piece of advice, right, if you're looking for a career shift, is maybe to consider going to business school. Again, I've seen people getting hired who had, 3 to 5 years of banking experience, went to, a top business school, and then got a great private equity job, right? There's still opportunities to go directly into private equity. That again, I would suggest like biggest thing is like get in touch with headhunters, find out the people who are willing to take a shot on you and willing to look at people of your background, um, as opposed to like the more traditional path. Um, and yeah, definitely think about and consider and think through your options in terms of whether you want to try and pursue that path or maybe do business school to help kind of create a natural switching point, which is what a lot of people do in terms of career switches is go to business school. Um, how would your approach differ in off-cycle recruitment versus on-cycle? Yeah. Okay. So this is a good question. The interview process on cycle versus off cycle is the same, right? They're going to look for the same qualifications, the same questions, the same type of modeling tests. You're going to have to still know how to do paper LBOs. You're going to have to know the same technicals. Um, what is different in terms of the interview process, just like it's usually condensed on cycle, it happens faster. And the types of firms who recruit on cycle tend to be more of kind of the mega fund, the ones who maybe are more focused on your background, your pedigree, right? Like, did you go to a top school? Did you go to a top bank? And those are the candidates they're going to tend to focus on. That's not true of all on cycle, but it's generally more true on cycle than off cycle. And so if you're coming from a non-target school, you're at a bank that's not a top tier bank, right? You may have vastly more opportunities off cycle than you would on cycle. The way you prep is going to be the same, right? They're going to expect you to be just as good as the other people. The reason that the on cycle people do um, recruit that way is because they feel again it's less risky to them. They say if I hire a kid from Harvard who was at Morgan Stanley M&A and he ends up being a bad associate, I can't really blame myself because I like hired, what I thought was like the best of the best, right? Whereas if they take a chance on someone that early, and it's very hard to determine if someone's actually a good candidate when they've never even worked before, because that's how early on cycle is. You haven't even started training in some cases for your banking job, right? Like it's less risky for them to take like, oh, this person on paper is like the, typical private equity person. Whereas, if they had 6 months, right? Then you're able to actually identify who's better and who's worse. I'm not saying because you went to an Ivy League school and a top bank, you're a better candidate, but to them it seems less risky, and that's typically why that happens, right? And so I get your point, like, oh, you don't feel like you may have opportunities for on cycle, and that may be true. I don't know what bank or what school you went to, but yeah, you may be somewhat disadvantaged for the firms on cycle, and those firms, frankly, might not be a good fit for you anyways, right? Like most of the firms that recruit today on cycle, I had no interest in working for when I was recruiting. Um, but the prep that you have to do and the level of, interview prep, networking, headhunter work, all of that's the same. You just have a bit more time to do it. Um, Okay, there's same kind of advice. I think it's tough, but if you want to do that, you need to work with headhunters and really try to network really hard. I've again seen people make that jump. Right? You're probably not going to make a jump from a very non-traditional background into like top tier one firm, but that doesn't mean your career trajectory and everything's going to be any different. Again, certain firms just like to hire people who look on paper very similar. Um, so second year IB analyst looking to break into private equity, is the off-cycle process more difficult in your second year? Um, no. So more and more people have shifted their recruiting back, right? When I recruited 8 years ago or whenever it was, if you didn't get a job on cycle, like your opportunities were like not great. But that's because every firm recruited on cycle at the time because, it was 7 months into my job versus a month before my job. Um, and so more and more people are delaying. We're seeing more and more second years going on cycle and even off cycle that year. Um, I wouldn't think that the off cycle process is going to be any more difficult. I think you need to have a good story and a good reason to tell headhunters, hey, here's why I didn't recruit the last year or the last year and a half. Either you didn't feel ready or private equity was a recent thing that you discovered you want to do, or like you've been really busy at work. There's a lot of great reasons. But being able to tell that story is important. I'm working with a couple clients right now who are a year plus into their banking career, and they're getting, good looks in terms of interviews. Um, and they're not disadvantaged in any way. And again, like I said, hiring plans change, right? So people are still always looking for people even on shorter timelines. So um, it's really about just continue to hustle over a longer period of time. You just need a good story. Um, I think I answered, Sam, your question. Really, like if you're looking to get into private equity, there's two options. You go straight into private equity firm. Those jobs are very few. Or look for a banking job or a consulting job that has a track record of getting people into private equity. Um, those are really the two paths if you want to go to private equity that you should think about doing. Again, there's people asking about these non-traditional paths. That is possible, but it just makes it a lot harder. Um, Prep for on cycle, not in the city due to how early kicked off this year. Some firms offer to push candidates to off cycle, but general thoughts on how to proceed, how early this year was. This year was like horrible. It's every year I say it can't get earlier, and every year it does. Um, I had so many clients who just simply were like, "Hey, I don't feel ready," and I was like, "Yeah, don't do it, right? Like, just wait." My thoughts are to you still have two options. You either go recruit off cycle in 6 months, and there's going to be a ton of amazing jobs. Some of like the firms, like my dream list of firms, right? When I was coming out of banking, all of them now recruit off cycle. So like there's great firms that recruit off cycle. Um, so don't be worried about it. Like I think people understand that there was such timing constraints. Some people didn't start training. If you didn't live in New York, you were like super disadvantaged because that's where all the interviewing was happening. There's some stuff happening on Zoom, but like it was just really hard this year, especially. And a lot of people didn't end up with things that they wanted. And a lot of people just didn't decide not to interview or didn't get any interviews because they were a little late to the game. So do not worry about it. Just start prepping now and have conversations in the next couple months with headhunters and explain why you didn't participate. And it's actually becoming the norm almost to not participate because there's so many opportunities after and it's just so early. So do not worry. There'll be plenty of jobs for you. Just make sure you continue to prep and be ready. Um, a 3 years experience on the investment team, early stage VC, getting a growth equity, grad school. Yeah. Yeah, I'd say like swimming upstream like is possible. Honestly, sometimes it's hard to move downstream and upstream. I think both come with their challenges, just because the jobs are very different. I think making a big jump upstream is very challenging, right? I wouldn't say going from early stage VC into, big buyout. I think that's nearly impossible. Um, Going from early stage VC into like the next step up, which is growth equity, totally possible. Um, I'd say, yeah, find opportunities to try and build those technical skills, meet with people in the industry, see what it took to get them in there, what are kind of the skills you need to build. And just, yeah, continue to hustle. Obviously, like there's Leland, right? People can be super helpful in terms of filling the technical gap there. There's other resources online, that I would suggest doing as well. Because interacting with a human being can only get you so far. Like you need to do a lot of work on your own too. But there's good resources. The thing I would suggest the most is like talk to people, figure out what you need to do to fill that gap, what those gaps are. Um, but I definitely think that's 100% possible, right? In terms of moving upstream. Um, yeah, how important is network to get into private equity? So it's important. Again, it's mostly driven by headhunters, and so knowing who the headhunters are, being able to contact them, right? Like when people work with me, for instance, like, and I work enough with them, like I know all the headhunters, like some of them on like a text basis, right? Like on cycle recruiting kicked off. I had a couple of people who wanted to get into a couple places. It was coming up, I could tell. And I shot a text to this one headhunter and said, hey, two clients, really strong. They want to go here and here. Um, and these kind of references and referrals go a long way. They got interviews with both of them, like, and really weren't in their process before I sent that text. So, like, building relationships with people, coaches can be very helpful, right? Not saying every coach is going to give you a reference. I won't give a reference to every client I work with, um, unless we spend time together and like I feel good about you, obviously. Um, but I would say build your network through coaching. You can build that network through this boot camp, right? You're going to meet a handful of coaches who have really good connections in the industry, and then also spend time networking with alumni and networking with people at the firms you want to be at. Right, that's important. It can set you apart when you have a connection directly with the firm, but it does not replace that connection with the headhunter, which is going to be the most important thing. So how do you find the headhunters? So if you are someone going to a bank that typically recruits for private equity, they will find you. Um, if you're not in a traditional banking group or not in a traditional consulting group that recruits a lot in private equity, you will need to find them. Um, right? Like, so that's talking to people, coaches, people who have been there before, people that can say, hey, here's 8 headhunters you need to reach out to. Let me help. Like I help my clients craft their email, reach out to the headhunters. These are the people you should email. Let me know if they don't respond. I'll go make them respond. So there is definitely some help if you're not getting reached out to. But typically if you're on that traditional path, they will actually find you. Um, I have not heard of a stigma behind search fund internships. A lot of people do search fund internships. Um, I think that's, yeah, it's tough to say that search fund internships are bad. I'm curious what the stigma. I've never heard of a stigma. Obviously you get really good like sourcing experience, right? There's not a lot of deal execution experience in a search fund because the idea is you do one deal, and so chances are you're probably not actually going to work on the transaction side of things. But right, sourcing experience and skill is super valuable in like anywhere from VC all the way up to growth equity and in growth buyout, right? There's a handful of jobs that don't require sourcing, but sourcing is a super valuable skill, and so building that, I don't see why there would be a big stigma around that. Um, just real quick, we've got about 10 to 15 minutes left, and I want to make sure that I just quick plug again for entering the giveaway and purchasing the boot camp. If you don't win the giveaway, in about 10 minutes or so, I'll kind of announce who wins the giveaway, and I think Amanda and the team will kind of be in touch on next steps there. But sign up; it's going to be super helpful, especially if you're someone who didn't participate in on cycle and you're trying to figure out how to prep for off cycle and what it takes. You have time, and so this is great. Or if you're trying to figure out how to build your interview skills, or you're someone who's still in college and you're trying to prep for on cycle next year, whatever it is, it's going to be super valuable. So quick plug to go and sign up for that if you haven't. CFA. I have not seen a CFA being valued almost at all in private equity. It's more valuable in kind of the advisory space, and very I wouldn't say it almost carries any weight in the private equity space, unfortunately. I don't know if that's the answer you wanted here, but that's just the truth. Um, what's the process of going from direct lending private credit to private equity with no previous IB experience? It can be done. What I would say is obviously private lending, direct lending, there's a logical step to getting into capital markets groups at private equity, right? Most upper middle market and mega cap funds have teams of people who specifically work on the debt aspect of the LBO, right? Building relationships with lenders, getting the best debt package, managing debt in the portfolio, all that stuff. That is by far the most relevant experience that you get. And like getting into those jobs is pretty straightforward. I think it's going to be trickier to go into a investment like buyout type role where you don't have that transaction level experience, right? I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's harder. But if you're like, I want to work in private equity, you like the idea of private equity, I would definitely look into the capital markets side of private equity firms. Uh, it's a cool job if that's where your experience is. You get to work on transactions still and like get the feeling of private equity. Um, and it's a really interesting career path. So I definitely explore that as well. MS degree in entrepreneurship compared to MBA within the industry would it still be recognized, and does it create a competitive advantage when recruiting? Probably depends on the industry, right? Like, and what stage of investing you're looking at. I'd say like a master's in entrepreneurship at like VC growth equity, where you're kind of more company building and sourcing and doing all that, like that's probably more like going to be more valuable. I wouldn't say an MS in entrepreneurship carries a lot of weight at the kind of higher end buyout arena. Um, it probably creates a competitive advantage against people who don't have a master's. But I wouldn't say it necessarily differentiates you from an MBA. But obviously, you would need to understand a bit more context there. So what makes banking consulting unique regarding training to work in private equity? Um, yes. So a few things, right? There are other roles that you can get these kind of, M&A, LBOs experience, right? That exists certainly in other roles. Um, but I would say the level at which it's the repetition and the amount of reps that you get is probably not comparable in any other job when you think about banking and consulting, right? Consulting lacks a lot of the technical skills. And so, there's still a gap there that people want to think about, but it comes with really interesting strategy and higher level critical thinking skills. Um, but to be honest, like it's also a testament that they know you can work really hard and they can work you really hard. People at entry level banking consulting jobs, they work really hard and they work long hours, for better or worse. And it's a bit of that like, oh, this person's worked 80-hour weeks and just like drilling this into their heads over and over again. Um, I know that they can learn how to do this then, right? That's kind of the idea. I'm not saying it's a good path or like the right way to think about things, but I think that's how people generally think about it. Yeah, okay. On this question, Deji, I think like for me, without having banking experience, it's tough, right? And so maybe consider going into some sort of advisory or banking role and then pivoting it into private equity. I think it's very hard, again, to come out, especially as you're already out of MBA, right? I think kind of that key pivoting point is like during the MBA if you're going to try and pivot. So again, would need more context around that, but it's going to be challenging, and so I think you need to take it in incremental steps. And first step would be like, okay, how do I get into a more banking type job, versus advisory on like the investment wealth management side, which is less transaction oriented. It's really about getting that transaction experience. Um, Okay, so you're looking to pivot into PE, middle market M&A advisory, buy and sell side. So you know that stuff. Um, yeah, I would say for you, and again, don't have the full context. It's more about like finding the right firm fit. Um, I wouldn't recommend going in at an analyst level, right? Um, but I would say like look at maybe the lower middle market of firms. We're coming in at, maybe a senior associate level. Um, you know, that where it's going to be easier to get into the kind of that level. Um, Certainly you could go the analyst route. I just don't think that it's not really the type of person they're looking for, right? Like I think going into the associate or senior associate level is really the level at which they would kind of think of you. Um, and so it's really about finding the right firm fit and the right firm that would kind of take you on at the right level that you'd feel comfortable with. I would not suggest going straight into an analyst role. Um, I think there's, that just like it feels like maybe sets you back a little bit in terms of your career. But again, if that's a path you want to take, then you could explore that. Um, okay, where and how do you find PE hunters? Again, ask. You kind of just need to know who the names are. There's about 8 to 10 that matter. And it's just knowing who they are. You can reach out to them on their website, but if you don't know what website to go to, it's going to be kind of hard. And then you can get emails from people who have obviously been through it. Top 3 banks and top 3 consulting firms that private equity recruit from. Okay, so just think about like kind of the big banks, right? Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan, right? Those are like bulge bracket banks. Obviously, there's a lot of really top tier boutique banks, which are also great, right? Like Lazard, Evercore, Moelis, Catalyst, like those banks also great to get into private equity. Basically, like kind of the brand names are the ones that people are looking for. Consulting firms, like think about the, Bain, BCG, McKinsey's of the world. Not that other consulting firms also don't go into private equity. I'm just saying like those are kind of the typical ones. All right, just checking in on time. Oh, and Amanda just announced the winner, Sanjay. You have won the free boot camp giveaway. So congrats. um, so I think I've kind of gotten to the last question here. Could you give us a general checklist of things we need to know / be ready for prior to reaching out to headhunters? That's a great question. So for those of you who are not aware, right, the headhunters will help place you into interviews, but they're also used as like a screening function. So they're not going to put people into interviews where they are not, you know, not they don't feel already, right? And so they're going to do some high level um interview questions, right? So quick checklist of things you need to have nailed down. First of all, like what you want, what your preferences are in terms of firm size, firm strategy, location, industry, all that. You need to have your story down, right? That walk me through your resume, why you want to do private equity. And then it starts getting a little more into like more technical stuff. So they can ask you some high level LBO questions. And then they're probably what a lot of headhunters like to do is like try and get to the crux of how you think about a business, how you think about a an investment and how to think like an investor. So they'll throw a company at you, right? And they'll want you to explain why it's a good or a bad investment. Or they'll look at your resume and you have some maybe deal experience from an internship and talk to me about your deals, right? So that's a big piece of it too. But it's usually high level. So like a lot of behavioral stuff and then some high level technical and deal related questions that show that you have like investment knowledge and can think critically about things of that nature. All right, one last question. Do you have any thoughts on using Wall Street Prep online programs for recruiting or preparing for private equity? So yeah, so the one that I would say is used almost ubiquitously, right? Is wow, I just had a massive brain lapse. The modeling. It's used often for modeling. Geez, why am I blanking on the name? Um, I will figure out the name in the next 2 minutes. I don't know why it's escaping me, but like literally everyone uses it. It takes you through basically, yeah, Peak Frameworks. Thank you. Um, so Peak Frameworks is like an online package you can buy that basically takes you through different levels of LBO modeling, right? You can do that one-on-one with a coach, but frankly, like doing all your LBO models like side by side with a coach, like is probably just not the best use of your time, right? And so Peak Frameworks is great. They kind of have different levels. They start with like a basic LBO and like work up. You can run through paper LBOs. What I would say is cannot be done on Peak Frameworks. Like doing the model and being able to do a paper LBO is like 50% of the task. The other 50% is presenting it and communicating it. And so in that situation, right, you can prep on your own, but then use a coach or even a friend to run through the paper LBO with and be able to talk about it or run through and explain your model, right? You want to have someone like mock with you and pressure test all of your assumptions in your model and really try and poke holes at you because that's what's going to happen in a real life situation. And you can model, like crazy, and be super fast at modeling. But if you can't talk about it and present about it, right, like that's going to hurt you. And you're not, no one will care that you modeled, you cranked out a 3 statement model in an hour if you can't present about it. Because we can teach modeling, we can't teach. It's much harder to teach, clear communication and other kind of soft skills in and around that. So yeah, I would say that's helpful. I don't know enough about WSO, Wall Street Prep, all those other online programs. Um, I think they could be helpful for kind of a high level overview. But again, Peak Frameworks is good for technical, and then nothing really replaces working with a human, whether that's a coach or like a buddy or friend or someone who's now in private equity, and like being able to work face to face and kind of bounce things off of him or her. Awesome. So thank you guys so much. Again, quick plug for the PE Bootcamp. I know most of you, all of you except for one did not win the giveaway, but please go sign up. This is what it includes. Again, typical price is $2,000. If you sign up tonight, it's going to be only $1,000. Super massive value. Really, really good. Just base level kind of bootcamp to get you kind of jump started. And I think that's the end. Oh, and if you guys want to work with me, you can sign up for a free 15-minute call, figure out if things if working with me makes sense, then great. Would love to work with you. I'm very honest if working with me does not make sense, and I'll point you in the direction of other coaches, whether it's your requirements don't fit my schedule or my how I like to work, or you're coming from a unique set of circumstances. There's some European clients who are looking to get into certain European firms where what they're looking for, maybe I can't help as well as maybe another coach can. That being said, I have several European clients, but like I'll be honest, and would love to just kind of chat with you and see if coaching with me makes sense. But appreciate everyone for joining and go sign up for the bootcamp. Thank you guys.